views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hey there, welcome to the Bronx Buzz. This is BronxNet's program where we talk to reporters and writers and journalists and editors and videographers and filmmakers and artists, which will come up later in the program. Really anybody who's putting stuff out in and about the borough of the Bronx. And we're going to start off with my longtime buddy, David Cruz. People in the Bronx may know him from the Norwood News, but he's a staff reporter over there at Gothamist. Nice to have you with us, David.
Hi, Gary. How you doing?
You're doing well. I'm always excited, and David is always right along the way. He's got a journalist's attitude. I like that. Dave, let's just talk about the primary. There's so many things we could talk about. I think 4 council members did reach the 50% threshold. I shouldn't say already council members, but 4 Democrats will be on, the Democratic candidates in the fall. What are your thoughts of how the election went in the Bronx?
I kind of feel like it kind of went with where like the prognosticators were saying in terms of who were the likely winners for the races. I was particularly, just kind of focusing in on the 11th council district race with Eric Dinowitz, who had previously won the seat through a special election in April, and then looks like he's in the lead right now, although he does not have the 50% needed to avoid a ranked choice voting runoff process. And so like that's going to, remain to be seen as to whether or not he'll be able to hold the seat. Although from what folks have been telling me, it looks like he is a lock to win. Then of course I was paying attention to the 13th council district race, which became more interesting after Mark Jonah decided he wasn't going to run. And so this paved the way for Marjorie Velasquez, who had previously ran against Jonah in 2017, and she had gotten party backing. And then, of course, the 15th council district race, once again, it was a special election win for Oswald Felice, and looks like he's going to likely secure the seat once again. So overall, it was kind of a good night in a way for the Bronx Democratic Party as well, because they had all the 4 who they had endorsed, I think, a few months back, are leading in the races, if not actually have clinched a win. So I kind of thought it was also a good night for them as well.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious what you think of that. There was only one race that's real close, and that's the one in the 18th. Amanda Farias leads by like 96 votes over William Rivera. Do you think any, just in terms of evaluating ranked choice voting, any of these are like we're going to get a big surprise? Like, for example, Eric Dinowitz would get defeated. Perina Sanchez would get defeated in the 14th. That ranked choice will really come into play. Of course, it could come into play in the borough president's race as well, right? I mean, let's be honest.
The only thing about, obviously, with predicting an outcome under ranked choice voting is very hard, because you don't know whether or not all the voters had made choices for all 5 candidates. And so it's conceivable that some voters have just decided to do what's called bullet voting, where they just essentially just vote for one person and they don't make choices for anyone else. So, that kind of, it's hard to sort of make a guess as to like where the pendulum is going to be swinging, because ranked choice voting is just something, at least to this scale, we've never sort of seen before. So this is sort of like a remains to be seen kind of a process. And we'll, obviously by now we'll probably have known the outcome, but
we should mention we're taping this earlier, several days earlier than it's going to air. So anything is possible between now and then.
Correct. And that's also the thing too. It's like I'd like to see how many people who voted cast a number 2 or number 3 or number 4, number 5 choice, because it's not as if everyone has to pick all 5. And I think there was a little bit of confusion when I went out to the polls in terms of like people trying to figure out whether or not they needed to do all 5. the bottom line is that it's possible that, some voters decided to just do one.
Right. Or their second choice was one of the people who's going to be eliminated early on. I mean, you
Correct.
just don't know. Anyway, Dave, I want to talk to you about an article you wrote, which I thought was fascinating, and it's right to the core of what people are talking about in the Bronx. And the headline is, "The Bronx has the highest crime rate in New York City. What do locals want the next mayor to do about it?" What did you find?
Well, one thing I kind of wanted to do was kind of get away from this political bubble that I think journalists tend to be in sometimes. And we all talk about what we think people are sort of like assuming, or like making like, these broad sweeping generalizations. So I decided to actually go and do Man on the Street. And I guess, since we're talking about this show, talking about journalism, Man on the Street is very hard. Sometimes it's, it depends on who you get and who's
Yeah,
willing
you
to
could
talk
you
to you.
could get people who tell you stuff that's just wacky or very unusual. It could be those are the only two or three people who think that, and now all of a sudden you've scanned the whole thing in that direction.
Right. And
Believe me,
that's
I know that very well.
right. And so like I decided to spend a few hours in the Bronx and go around separate neighborhoods to talk to people about crime. And the thing is, for the most part, most people were saying crime is a problem in this borough, and they were not trying to cast a political sort of like aspersions to it. They were simply just saying it was bad, and they want any mayor. And I wasn't looking for like who they thought would be the best mayor necessarily. I wanted to see what their solutions would be. What would they want to see happen? And so
And they said,
many of them, they took a very different turn. Some wanted more cops in the neighborhoods. Like I went to the one section within the 48th precinct, which is, in Belmont, the same place where Lissandro Guzman Feliz had been killed. And a lot of folks over there were saying, we need more police. At least three or four people I spoke to over there said that they wanted more cops. But then there was another person that I mentioned in the article. He wants to look at crime from a holistic approach. He wants to sort of fix the issues that cause people to sort of pick up a weapon or decide to resolve conflict, through violent means. And so they were taking an approach that Maya Wiley would have adopted, or Diane Morales would have adopted. And so, but the bottom line here is that many people essentially said that they feel that there's a feeling, a tenor within the Bronx that has made them feel slightly a little bit unsafe. One woman I spoke to, she just said that like come 5:30, 6 o'clock, she's at home. She doesn't leave the house. She said that
because she's scared.
because she's scared.
That's
And she
terrible.
said if she needed to go to St. Barnabas Hospital, which is a few blocks away, she'll call an ambulance because she just can't see herself walking
Wow.
the streets.
Think
So I
about
thought that
how
was pretty
horrible
eye-opening.
that is. That's terrible.
Yeah, and I felt like, there's, people like we tend to politicize crime a lot. But when you want to talk to people who don't have a stake in politics, and who are not treating crime like with a political lens, you begin to see there's a very different sort of like feeling on the ground. And that's kind of like the takeaway
Mhm.
that I got.
I think that what you just expressed was really both sides of the spectrum, because there certainly are many people who obviously who say they don't like the idea of defunding the police. They want more police. Goodness knows, no matter who you are, we need police protection in our neighborhoods. We need a good NYPD. I think then the second person that you talked about, is talking about kind of a holistic look, a social service look at it. And I think you're going to need a multi-pronged approach. I thought what the police department did recently, they were kind of forced into it, that they're now beginning to train police officers how to deal better with mental health calls. To me, that's just a waste of everybody's time. We have social service people that can do that, spend the time coordinating them, but the police department is so they don't want the idea of their budget being cut, so they think they have to do it. I think that's the kind of leadership we're going to need from City Hall to straighten this out. That's my feeling. So I'm one of the guys in the Bronx that you talked to.
Right. Well, and I guess it's so funny because like shortly after I had written that article, we saw that shooting that took place within the 44th precinct, near the Mount Eden Claremont section, where those two kids were nearly killed because they were caught in the crossfire between a gunman and the intended target. And Eric Adams had gone over to that section with the Bronx Borough president. And it made me think, like, what kind of a mayor we may very well see if Eric Adams indeed holds his lead, in the sense that he may very well head out to these neighborhoods, and he may want to just sort of like take a more on the ground look as to what's happening, because I don't think any other mayoral candidate had done that as well. So it just
Okay,
made me.
Sean Donovan had been around the Bronx, but let's focus on Eric Adams. You know, if you look at the maps, the voting maps, Eric Adams really took the Bronx. I mean, let's
Yeah,
be
yeah,
clear. Whatever the color they used was blue or whatever it is,
right.
he took the Bronx. I think people, number one, like the idea of a cop who really knows what's going on. And number two, I think there's a level, from a criminal justice point of view, a level of trust that he's not only a pro NYPD guy, that he understands this tenuous relationship between police and communities. That's my sense.
No, yeah, and I think you're right too. I think his resume essentially said that here's a person that, yes, he was a cop, but he was also skeptical of the department as well, to the point where he kind of used that as part of his platform, that he was not necessarily a typical rank and file. He's the guy who had questioned stop and frisk.
Right.
Not to the point where he says you have to eliminate it, but to the point where he kind of got the sense that it was being abused. And also
Right.
bear in mind, I think too, his story is kind of like that of a person who's trying to change, who was a victim of the police department, who's trying to change the system from within, seemed to have resonate with voters.
I think what he was doing there was distancing himself
Right.
from somebody saying, "Oh, here's a cop," you know, that
Right.
kind of thing. Dave, we're almost out of time. What do you got coming up? Anything interesting we ought to be looking at, or
Well,
everything?
yeah, I'm still paying attention to what's happening. I'm hoping that we get an outcome with the Bronx Borough president's race soon. That seems a little bit too close to call in terms of, really predicting like a
Right.
winner at this point. Who knows? Ranked choice voting could turn things upside down, and absentee ballots.
Who knows?
Favor.
Dave, we got to go. My good buddy David Cruz,
Sure.
find him on Gothamist, and always a pleasure to have you. Don't go away. We'll be right back, and we're going to talk to Lovey Pignata, who just painted a beautiful new mural. Don't go away.